On a freezing February night in 2004, a 21-year-old nursing student crashed her car on a lonely New Hampshire road. The engine still ticked with heat. Her belongings were left behind. Her cell phone, her wallet, her carefully packed bags. A bus driver stopped and offered help. She refused. Minutes later, police arrived and she was gone. Gone. As if the earth had swallowed her whole. Her footprints vanished after only a few steps. A tracking dog followed her scent for barely 100 yards. Then nothing. Not a single trace. What was she running from? Or who was waiting for her in the shadows? For more than 20 years, her family has searched these icy woods, begging for answers, refusing to let her name fade. But the road keeps it secret. And tonight, we walk back into that darkness to relive the last moments of Maura Murray and the chilling mystery that has never let her go. Before we dive deeper, hit subscribe, like, and share for more unsolved cold cases and chilling mysteries. The night the road swallowed Maura Murray began like any other late winter evening in western Massachusetts. Small, ordinary motions that, stitched together, would fray into one of New England's most stubborn mysteries. It was February 9th, 2004. Maura, 21, a nursing student at UMass Amherst with precise handwriting and the habit of planning ahead, had moved through the day with the uneasy focus of someone shouldering more than she told the world. She packed a few things from her dorm room as if preparing for a change, though she did not tell friends where she was going. At 3:32 a.m., she emailed a class assignment. That afternoon, she withdrew cash, bought a selection of alcohol at a liquor store, and, in a message that has since felt like a strange and deliberate punctuation mark, emailed the supervisor to say she needed a week away because there had been a death in the family. There had been no death. These actions were small, checkable gestures that would later form the brittle scaffolding of questions no one could answer. She left Amherst in the late afternoon. Security cameras would show her at an ATM, alone. Neighbors and classmates would later remember her as careful and quietly brilliant. A Dean's List student who had planned on nursing as a vocation, who had, as her family later described, been under pressure from family problems and personal struggles. But for several hours that day, she moved like someone with plans she had not yet revealed, a suitcase and a car, and a single human heart beating behind the wheel. By evening, on the serpentine stretch of Route 112 that cuts through the dark river valleys of Haverhill, New Hampshire, a single car crash parked its bright, awkward attention on the shoulder. A passing contractor would later tell officers he saw a young person walking quickly east along the road a few miles from where the car would be found. A bus driver on his route would stop and offer help to the driver at the crashed vehicle. The bus driver later said the woman had declined assistance. When police responded, the car was empty. The vehicle, Maura's car, contained personal items. Her phone, a packed purse, and a trail of small, mundane evidence that suggested she had not planned to vanish forever. Yet Maura herself had disappeared into the dark. It is easy to imagine how, in those first shocking hours, certainty and fear traded places in her family's minds. Her father, Fred, was called and told his daughter's car had been found. He drove to New Hampshire in the small, raw hours of the morning and joined volunteers and officials combing the snow-slick shoulders and tree lines. A tracking dog followed a scent from one of Maura's gloves to a point about 100 yards east of the vehicle, and then lost it. The police would issue a "Be on the lookout" report. The small-town searchers would call it a missing person case, but for Maura's family, each day that followed felt less like an investigation and more like a slow, public unmaking. What made the disappearance so persistent in people's minds was not only that there was no body and no definitive sign of what had happened. It was the stitches of contradictory detail. She had withdrawn $280 that afternoon. Security footage from the liquor store showed Maura alone as she purchased liquor and a boxed wine, purchases that did not match the idea of someone immediately intent on hurting herself or vanishing into the woods. Her dorm room was found packed as if she was preparing to leave for a longer period. Her last phone activity was a brief check of voicemail. Somebody, somewhere knew something. Somebody who mattered to her would later say she would not have planned this to the point of leaving money and a packed room behind. Over the months and then the years, the facts of that day, the ATM receipt timestamp, the purchase receipts, the emails, and the crash report, were picked over with the hungry curiosity of people who would not let go. Investigators released what they could, and their careful procedural language hid the panic at their edges. Maura Murray was a missing person. The case had suspicious circumstances. No trace of her had been found. The family, anguished and relentless, moved between hope and fury. They criticized missteps, they sought private searches, they put up posters, they spoke with reporters. And they began to live with a new calendar in which every anniversary of that February felt like another small amputation of a life they knew. That first night, the witnesses were scattered and imperfect. The contractor who had seen someone walking, the bus driver, the neighbor who later said he heard a noise. Witness memories blur in the cold. People's recollections of light, of a figure's height, of the way someone moved, slide into uncertainty the longer they are recalled. And yet, the image that kept returning in public retellings was of a young woman who had been seen, who had been offered help, who had walked away from a vehicle that had crashed and then simply gone. It is the smallest of the mysteries, a distance of a few yards, a few minutes between one human being and another, and everything that can happen in that interval. The internet found the case and would not stop talking. Forums and message boards were full of theories: disappearance, voluntary flight, abduction, deliberate staging. Every new tip was a small electric shock, a momentary flare of hope. Sensational articles bled into thoughtful, painstaking reconstructions. In the public imagination, Maura's disappearance became a riddle to be solved, and sometimes, cruelly, a story told as entertainment. But for the Murrays, it was a life lived in the brittle afterimage of a daughter, sister, and friend who had been full of plans and suddenly unaccounted for. Her family's grief was not a private thing. It was an architecture of public appeals and private, sleepless nights. The details that stick in the throat are domestic and small. The glove that retained to send a dog could follow. The voicemail an acquaintance said sounded like sobbing. The bizarre, inexplicable email about a false death. People tend to look for patterns and intentions where there may be none, but these particular scraps, trail markers that could mean anything, turned the case into a maze. Law enforcement, constrained by protocols and often by the limits of time, money, and jurisdiction, conducted searches and interviews that, to some observers, seemed slow or incomplete. Some leads were followed and leads that cooled. The nature of policing, methodical, documented, legal, sometimes felt at odds with the way grief moves, raw and immediate and fracturing. Years folded into one another. Volunteers combed ravines and fields when tips came in. Cadaver dogs and sonar scans were employed. People who had once lived in Haverhill or traveled those roads pored over the topography of the area. The trees and the stone walls, the places a person could hide or be hidden, the places a car could stop at the haphazard edge of a highway and go unnoticed. The countryside, for all its small-town sentimentality, has blind spots, culverts, wetlands, overgrown ditches, and steep banks. In the human imagination, these become both sanctuary and prison. In reality, they are simply places where a great many things can remain unseen for a long time. Searchers would return again and again to the same places, measuring the distances a person could walk, the time it took to get to a farmhouse's back door. Detectives interviewed friends, exes, and acquaintances. They pulled phone records and bank receipts. With the passage of time, they also began to tap civilian curiosity, to listen to bloggers who had spent years combing police reports and airport logs, to consider tips from people who had once noticed something and decided only later to come forward. In the modern arc of an unsolved case, the line between amateur sleuth and sympathetic civilian is porous. Some of this community-driven attention helped keep the case from fading altogether into cold files. Some of it complicated established lines of evidence, creating noise that investigators had to sift through to find the signal. For Maura's family, the work of living without resolution became a life of small, stubborn rituals. Birthday candles lit in hotel rooms while investigators followed leads. Interviews given to keep the story alive in hope that someone would recognize the face in a faded photograph and speak. In 2024 and 2025, long after the first searches, Julie Murray, Maura's sister, used the new tools of podcasting to bring the case back into public conversation, chasing fragments, revisiting old interviews, and asking the same question she had asked every day since 2004. What happened to my sister? The family's persistence was not a refusal to accept loss. It was the insistence that the shape of their grief had a name, and that the name deserved answers. And still the evidence, crisp in its own way, remained stubbornly inconclusive. Physical items in the car suggested an intention to return. The packed dorm room suggested a plan to be gone for a while rather than forever. The voicemail that some people described as distressed was never publicly authenticated in a way that settled the question for everyone. Every fragment seemed to point in several directions at once, black and white behaviors that, when stitched together, were only gray. When you tell this story aloud, and many have, the tension is not only that Maura vanished, but that the map available to us is incomplete and contradictory, and somehow intimate. A small life recorded in receipts and emails and security footage. Those who knew Maura paint a portrait of someone who took fierce pride in competence, a student who kept track of things, who planned. When someone who is otherwise methodical leaves an odd breadcrumb trail, it tends to be read as intention. But intention is not the only explanation for strange decisions. People under stress do unusual things. They call when they don't usually call. They lie to cover a wound they aren't ready to expose. They leave prepared, as if they might be gone for days. All of these explanations are human and inadequate. Grief is not the only ingredient. So too is the cold arithmetic of chance. Who happened to be driving that night? Which headlights were visible from a shoulder? Which person heard a noise and chose not to investigate? Small, slanting decisions ripple outward. Theories accrued, as they always do, like leaves. Some argued Maura ran away, that she planned the disappearance and started a new life. Others swore she would never have left family and friends in such a fashion. Many suspected she had been struck by foul play, the wrong person at the wrong time, a good Samaritan who was not good at all. In a case like this, accusations become a currency, traded across message boards and crime podcasts and newspaper columns. The family, understandably, favored the theory that someone else had taken her, that the world had an ownerless moment and a violent possibility had lived inside it. The investigators kept their own counsel, tracking the credible tips and discarding those that led nowhere. Time is peculiar with missing people. 21 years after the crash, Maura's age, 21 at the time, occupies the same number as the number of years since. A cruel arithmetic that families of the missing feel in their bones. Each public anniversary produces another wave of interest. A fresh news article, a new round of armchair detectives, a renewed plea from a family member. And yet, despite these surges, a stable, definitive narrative refuses to form. The most permanent thing about Maura Murray's case is the absence, not only of her whereabouts, but of the final paragraph of her life. There is no closure. There is only the slow erosion of time against memory, and the family's continued demand that the case be treated as more than a curiosity. People who travel those roads on winter evenings now sometimes think of Maura, because stories do not live only in court files and headlines. They live rippling through the imaginations of strangers who find themselves driving down the same highway and noticing how quickly the trees close in. The human mind is a pattern-making machine that long ago turned Maura's absence into a cautionary tableau. A bright car on a dark curve, a young woman walking away, a family waiting for a knock that never arrives. That tableau is part grief and part culture. The undercurrent in a country obsessed with cold cases and true crime, and the idea that every missing person is a story that can be solved if we look hard enough. But looking hard is often a labor of tiny, lonely hope, of volunteers dragging nets through shallow ponds, and of reporters reading through dusty police files for a mistake that might have been the hinge of everything. There have been moments that read like the beats of a story. The discovery of the car, the description of the glove and the scent trail, the false death email, the withdrawal of cash. And there have been quiet, private beats. The family in hotel rooms near the search zones, the sister who later used a podcast to keep her sister's name in the air, the low-grade anger at missed leads, and at the way the first days of an investigation set the frame for everything that follows. When the machinery of policing moves slowly, the vacuum is filled by those who will not forget. There is tenderness in the ways they refuse to let a girl who loved books and hospital corridors become a statistic. There is also the rawness of being conscripted into a public drama of which they did not sign on to be actors. At the center of this is Maura herself, whom we can only reconstruct through documents, a precise email signature, a neighbor's recollection, a photo of a young woman with a steady gaze. The real person resists being a symbol. She insists on being complicated and full of small interior contradictions. She was someone who liked to be useful, who wanted to build a life that would include a career in nursing. Whatever she carried with her that February, whether it was secrets or desperation, sorrow or an impulse, was private, and perhaps that privacy was what made the public search for answers so invasive and so necessary at once. Her absence became public property because the family refused to let it become private grief alone. Inevitably, narrative strangers come with narrative certainty. Podcasts and true crime TV take the fragments and fit them into structures. The suspect, the motive, the reveal. Those structures serve appetite and sometimes justice, but they often flatten the lived contours of a person's life into a plot. To read Maura's story only as a puzzle is to risk losing the human point of it, that a young woman who had plans and friends and a small predictability to her days went out one night and did not return. Whatever narrative you prefer, runaway, accident, abduction, it is a theory built atop the bones of absence. And absence, unless filled by proof, remains open to imagination. In the end, the cold fact remains. On February 9, 2004, Maura Murray's car crashed on a New Hampshire road. The vehicle was found with its driver missing. The person who vanished has not been located. It is a sentence that folds into many other sentences about missed chances and the limits of luck, about procedural investigations and the ache of waiting families. It is also a sentence that drags with it a chorus of living voices. Volunteers who will not forget, investigators who keep a file active, and a family that still, 21 years later, wakes into this unbearable question. The story has no finality. It has instead the longer, sadder shape of an open wound that will not close. To tell Maura's story now is to participate in a kind of vigil. It is to acknowledge that the smallest details, a glove, a receipt, an email sent at 3:32 a.m., can become anchors for decades of effort. It is to reckon with how people respond to mystery, with speculation, with organized search, with stubborn love. It is to remember that every unsolved case is not only an unanswered question, but a life deferred, a future arrested. Maura's life was not only defined by the night she disappeared. She was defined by the people who loved her, by the work she wanted to do, and by the private things that, for reasons only she knew, moved her that day. If there is a moral, it is not tidy. There is only the persistent human demand that absence be rendered into knowledge, that silence be met with the labor of asking, and that the people who are still alive, Maura's family above all, be allowed to carry their memory outward until an answer comes. For now, the road keeps its secret. The small arc of taillight, the curve where a car kissed a bank, the steps of a young woman into a dark that did not give them back. People still drive that road. They still notice the shoulder and wonder. They still think of a young nurse who disappeared into the evening and left the world to invent explanations in her absence. For those who loved her, the better hope is simple, that someone someday will speak, and that those words will finally make a line from past to present and return a beloved name to shape, to story, to answer. The silence of Maura Murray's disappearance is not a quiet silence. It is loud, restless, and alive. For more than 2 decades, it has been the unrelenting hum beneath her family's lives, filling the spaces where her voice should be, shaping every holiday, every phone call, every moment when someone should have said, "Remember when Maura," but stopped because the memory hurt too much. To understand the weight of that silence, you have to stand with her father, Fred, on the side of Route 112 in the days after the crash. Snow clung to the ditches. The woods pressed close. He was 60, exhausted, raw with panic, walking that road with his heart in his throat. He would later say that the first 48 hours of an investigation are everything. and that those hours were lost, mishandled, wasted. What haunted him was not only that his daughter had vanished, but that maybe, just maybe, she had needed him in those first minutes. That if someone had searched harder, if someone had looked deeper, she might have been found. That grief metastasized into a lifelong mission. Fred was not only a father in mourning, he became an investigator, a critic, a relentless seeker. He would knock on doors, challenge law enforcement, and walk that cursed road in winter after winter until the years bent him. The family carried that same torch. Her sister Julie, her brother Kurt, her mother, before she passed. All of them lived with the same knife in their chest, not knowing. Julie, especially, has become her sister's voice, speaking in interviews, starting a podcast, refusing to let the world forget. But even for her, the story is a labyrinth. There is no thread to lead her out, only walls of speculation and dead ends. Still, she walks it. Every time she speaks Maura's name into a microphone, she is breaking through the silence that threatens to swallow her sister whole. The human cost of this case is not only in the missing person, but in the slow erosion of hope. Every year since 2004, there have been vigils in New Hampshire. Candles flickering in the cold, faces bowed against the night. Strangers stand shoulder to shoulder with the Murray family, some who never knew Maura, others who only knew her through the grainy college photo that has circulated endlessly online. They light candles because absence demands ritual. They stand in silence because silence is all they have. And yet, hope flickers in impossible places. In 2019, police dug up the basement of a house near the crash site after a tip suggested human remains might be there. It led to nothing. In 2021, ground-penetrating radar was brought in again, searching. Again, nothing. Each time, the family's hearts were lifted, only to be crushed when the news came back. No answers. Imagine the violence of that hope. Every time the phone rings, every time a detective says we may have something, the wound is opened again. The internet has not been kind to Maura's memory. Armchair detectives dissect her choices with clinical detachment, sometimes cruelty. Why did she lie about the family death? Why the liquor store purchases? Why the cash withdrawal? Every detail of her life has been turned into evidence against her. It is the dark cost of true crime culture, that a missing young woman becomes an object, a puzzle, a story for entertainment. And yet, buried beneath the noise, there are also people who truly care, who volunteer their time, who create forums dedicated not to judgment, but to remembrance. They say her name with tenderness. They keep the case alive so that someday, maybe, the truth can be spoken. But the truth may never come. That is the most chilling part. There may be no body to find. If Maura was abducted, her remains could be hidden in the endless sprawl of northern New England's forests, rivers, and mountains. If she ran, she may have blended into another life, so well that she has become someone else entirely. If it was an accident, the land may have claimed her, as it has claimed so many before. The White Mountains are vast and merciless. The Pemigewasset River swallows what it takes. In wilderness, time is the perfect accomplice. And yet absence leaves room for imagination. Her father, before his death in 2021, clung to the belief that Maura had been taken against her will. He refused to believe she had run away. He would say over and over, "Somebody knows something. Somebody saw her. Somebody out there has the answer." He never got that answer. He died carrying the weight of not knowing. It is perhaps the cruelest fate for a parent, to leave this world with a child's fate unresolved. Julie carries it now. She speaks often of the way time bends when you are waiting for a loved one. 21 years have passed, yet to her, it feels like the same February day playing on a loop. When the anniversary comes, she returns to New Hampshire, to the roadside memorials, to the candles and the photographs taped to trees. It is ritual, but it is also war. A war against forgetting, because forgetting is the second death. When the headlines fade, when the public grows bored, that is when the silence wins. Julie and the others who love Maura refuse to let that happen. They remind us that Maura was not just a case file. She was a sister, a daughter, a young woman who wanted to heal others through nursing, who smiled in photos, who had dreams bigger than the icy stretch of Route 112 where her life derailed. The story of Maura Murray is chilling because it is not finished. We tell stories expecting endings, a reveal, a culprit, a discovery. But this one does not end. It lingers. It infects the imagination, and it forces us to confront an unbearable truth. Sometimes people vanish, and sometimes the world never gives them back. When you drive that stretch of road today, the trees seem to lean closer, as if holding the secret in their branches. The snow muffles everything, the silence thick as wool. Somewhere, between the moment she left her car and the moment the police arrived, Maura Murray stepped into the dark and was gone. That gap, minutes, maybe less, has haunted 2 decades. And so the chilling end of the story is no ending at all. It is a loop, a haunting, a shadow cast across every February in New Hampshire. It is the sound of a father calling his daughter's name into the woods and hearing only his own voice echo back. It is the quiet sob of a sister who will never stop searching. It is the terrible stillness of a road that remembers what it saw, but will never tell. The final words belong not to theory, not to speculation, but to what is undeniable. On February 9, 2004, Maura Murray disappeared. She was 21. She was loved. And she never came home. The road still holds her secret. And until that secret breaks, until the silence cracks, Maura remains suspended between memory and myth, a name whispered in the dark, a young woman swallowed by winter, whose absence chills us still. Every file holds a secret. Will you discover it? Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on the notification bell, so you stay updated with mystery stories that strike a chord. Thanks for watching.